since you've been coming here for years, I would imagine that prior to the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, people's understanding of Russia or perception of Russia of many Europeans, maybe some Americans, was quite different to how it is now. Do you think that now we do actually understand Russia and Vladimir Putin, or do people still hold illusions or misconceptions about what Vladimir Putin, Russia, wants and how it approaches the world?
That's a tough question. So I've been writing about Putin since he first became president in the year 2000. So that's 25 years. And it's been clear to anybody who watches him carefully, at least since the first decade of this century, it's been clear that it's not just that he's not a Democrat, but that he had imperialist and aggressive designs on his neighbors. It's been clear since at least 2008 when he made a famous 7 or 8 when he made a famous speech here that he sees as one of his goals the undermining of the liberal world and of the Western alliance. It did take a long time before Europeans, not Germans in particular, because Germany had a special relationship with Europe, with Russia because of the gas pipelines. But it did take a long time for Europeans to understand that Russia wished them ill. Because the dominant theory of dealing with Russia, and this was true, Americans adopted it too in the initial years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, was that through trade and contacts, we would have, if not a democratic Russia, then at least a reasonable, peaceful Russia. And that the best way to ensure that happened was to continue this trade and contact. So it's not entirely, very, very often people are I think, unfair. It wasn't just greed or the desire for money or cheap gas. There was a theory that people believed that by having intimate, complex trade relations with Russia, that we would also have peace with Russia. And I should say, I wrote about this in my recent book, Autocracy, Inc. I should say that there were people believed that because that was the experience of the previous couple of decades. It was true that trade led to peace in Europe after the Second World War. It was true that, interaction with East Germany and with Russia it wasn't the entire explanation, but it was a part of the explanation for why reunification was possible. So people had reason to believe that. And it took a long time for people to understand that wasn't true. That in fact, by having these economic relationships with Russia, that they were empowering an autocratic state. And then in particular, they were empowering a rapacious oligarchic elite, that a very small number of people were benefiting from this trade, and that they were then using our financial system to steal and launder money from their own country, and that was the system that was being supported. But there were a lot of people who had stakes in it financially, politically, almost emotionally. The idea that Russia was an enemy was not something people wanted to process. And I should say maybe, and it's very tragic that this happened. I mean, I spent a lot of the 1990s traveling in Russia. I wrote several books about Russia. I worked in Russian archives. I had many Russian friends. It wasn't it's sad that this happened. So I'm not cheering people on or glorifying this disaster, but certainly over the past decade, I mean, 2014 was a very, very important turning point, because in 2014, it was clear that Russia not only had imperialist designs on its neighbors, but also that Russia wanted to show the Europe and the transatlantic community and the democratic world that it no longer cared about our laws, our rules, rules about not changing borders by force. They were going to, invade Crimea, and they were going to take Crimea, and they were going to change the border, and they didn't care about our institutions. And I believe that in 2022, they attempted to repeat that And then in 2022, they wanted to also show we don't care about human rights. We don't care about the Geneva Convention. We don't care about the UN Charter. We want to show that might makes right, and we can destroy another country if we want to. And that was a message of, it wasn't just imperial aggression. It was also, it was a strike in the war of ideas. Their idea is that the world should be ruled by large, brutal powers who get to do what they want, and other countries, little countries, don't count. And I think maybe people are beginning to understand that now. But it's true that the people had so much hope and so much money and there was so much at stake in the original vision and the desire for that to be true that it took a long time to let it go.
If you're enjoying this podcast, chances are that you like to know what's going on in the world of geopolitics. And if that's the case, you might want to sign up to my newsletter. There's a lot of news on geopolitics, but most of it just doesn't actually matter. It's just chasing headlines, emotions, and breaking news. What I want to do is to try to separate all this noise and find the signal. The stuff that actually does matter and will have consequences months and years down the line. And so in every edition, I pick out 3 things that do matter and explain why and what will be their future impact. You can find the link in the description, so check it out and sign up to stay informed.